something beside me, a light to the kerosene, and the places aren't real anymore, and the faces don't say anything, in the silent light of the mind-blown sphere. It's a game, Devil's Chess Club. Devil's Chess Club.
Welcome to Devil's Chess Club. I'm Aaron Good. Today I am going to be talking about a number of important current and historical issues, including the U.S. intelligence hand behind the plotters who knocked off the Haitian president, and recent further confirmation of the U.S. role in funding McJihad operations in Chechnya. The U.S. proxy war in Chechnya in the 2000s was something of a prequel to America's McJihad dirty war in Syria, or even NATO's Ukraine war in many respects. Then, for subscribers, I take a close look at a recent academic critique of American Exception, Empire, and the Deep State, my dissertation and book. It is probably best that this is on the Patreon because it involves a lot of sensitive words that might not be treated well by our algorithmic overlords here. So it's just as well that it's not in the public episode. Devil's Chess Club is part of the American Exception podcast. I'm told that it helps us if people subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit like on our videos. So if you could deign to click those clicks, we appreciate it. But most importantly, if you want to see this episode in its entirety, and if you want to have access to, in my not impartial opinion, the best podcast collection of deep political and historical analysis, please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. The URL is patreon.com/American Exception. The link is in the show notes. If you can afford it, please subscribe. The more Patreon subscribers we have, the more we can do. Among other things, we're trying to publish some books by Professor Peter Dale Scott and with Ben Howard and myself as co-authors on some of these pieces. And we're trying to make a documentary film on Peter Dale Scott, his biography, his political historical scholarship, and his amazing poetry. We need help to do this, so please subscribe to the American Exception podcast on Patreon. First thing that I want to talk about today is, these are a couple of Grayzone articles, and the first one is by our friend Kit Clarenberg, who I want to get back on here at some point in the near future. And the title of the article is Historic U.S.-Russia Prisoner Swap Exposes CIA Support for Chechen Jihad. So this is something that I've talked about in a number of episodes and write about briefly in American Exception. This is the U.S. support for Islamist terror in Central Asia, in the post-Cold War era. And one of the earlier places for this was in Chechnya. And in Chechnya, you had two wars there, really, and they were both backed by the West, even as the West was attempting to provide counter-terror, assistance and so on. This seems to be part of what we would call, or others have called, McJihad. There's a social scientist who invented that term, and I started using the term sort of independently for reasons similar to the original scholar who was writing about this shortly before 9/11 even. And the reason he came up with the title was the same reason that it popped up in my mind, and it was because, in my case, I had a political science teacher who assigned us the book by Benjamin Barber, and it was called Jihad versus McWorld. And then this guy puts together, logically so, looking at these intelligence connections, like, this is not really just like on one side, the corporate world in progress and McDonald's and all this, and then on the other side, the people resisting it, the jihadis, they represent like the resistance to this homogenized corporate world that we might not like and which might not be perfect, but I mean, compared to terrorism, McWorld must be pretty good, right? So this was a sort of liberal kind of coping way to deal with American imperialism, and it's kind of perfect if you think about it, because it's a way to look at what the U.S. is and what corporate empire is, and then you say compare it to its enemies, who are Islamist terrorists who want to return the world to like some sort of medieval kind of system of governance, and want to commit spectacular terrorist acts and so on. Well, the problem is that it seems that Western security services have sponsored the most reactionary and violent of Islamist groups, and it looked like the events of the post-Cold War era were fitting in that vein. And of course, the guy was probably more right than he knew. I don't know that he actually did much scholarship on the person who coined the McJihad term. I don't know that he did a lot of writing about these things after the fact. I guess I should look, but the fact that I hadn't really heard of him that until fairly recently says he did not become he did not stick with criticism of the war on terror, which, to be fair, you would not expect someone to do after 9/11. The climate in academia was not friendly to that, and for leftists, it became it became a sort of signifying thing to, if you're a Western leftist with some institutional support, you're not going to think about 9/11 and McJihad issues and such. So it's not the path to success in your field. So there you have it. But it's actually absurd the amount of chicanery that the U.S. was engaged in this era, and with this particular practice of using the most reactionary and violent Islamist terror groups to as pawns of U.S. foreign policy. And here they're essentially caught red-handed. And again, if the media would notice, it should be a big scandal. It should be written about in the New York Times and Time Magazine and Newsweek. It should be like, holy cow, the U.S. was supporting Al-Qaeda type terror in Chechnya, and now we can pretty much prove it. Whoa, we should rethink everything. No, there's none of that, because this is America. It's memory hold on consciously. It's where we just can't address any scandal, or we'll never adjudicate it, and that's just how it goes. And then the next, whatever happens next, that comes on, and it's so crazy that it's just forgotten. And this is like a footnote to a footnote to a footnote at this point in the minds of the U.S. public. So I'll tell you a little bit more about the story here, and I'll look at some excerpts from it. August 1 saw the largest prisoner exchange between Moscow and Washington since the end of the Cold War. Among those freed were Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan, who were each serving 16-year sentences for espionage. Newly released politician Ilya Yashin in Bonn, Germany, described the feeling of being beside the wonderful Rhine River when just a week earlier he was imprisoned in Siberia as really surreal. That's how he described it. But Yashin claimed that his release was difficult to personally accept because a murderer was free. He referred here to Vadim Krasikov, a Russian convicted of killing the Georgian-born Chechen militant Zelimkhan Kangashvili in Berlin in August 2019, who was also released as part of the deal. He was reportedly of extremely high value to the Kremlin. In a February 2024 interview with U.S. journalist Tucker Carlson, Russian President Vladimir Putin proposed trading Gershkovich for an unnamed Russian patriot imprisoned in a U.S. allied country for liquidating a bandit. So this guy that they released, Krasikov, had murdered someone overseas, I think in Europe. In Berlin. There it says right there. In Berlin, and was imprisoned for this. And so on the surface, you would think, well, that's political assassinations and extraterritorial assassinations. That's not in accordance with international law, and that's fair enough here. So it's not accurate to say that the U.S. is the only violator of international law. Here you have another country, a great power, really, who takes it upon itself to carry out an extrajudicial killing on foreign soil. So on its face, we can say that that is not good for international law and for, an orderly, just, lawful world, okay? On the surface, that's not an unreasonable assessment. But let's get back to it. While the Russian operative has been subject of intense mainstream interest since the swap, the media has largely whitewashed Kangashvili's background. To the extent he was mentioned at all, he was laconically characterized as a Chechen militant, or more favorably as a dissident. For some anti-Russian ideologues, the Western media's failure to completely lionize Kangashvili demanded a rebuke. Georgy Kandalaki, a former Georgian lawmaker with the United National Movement of the now imprisoned former president and U.S. poster boy Mikhail Saakashvili, was so repulsed he took to X to correct the record. Kandalaki seethed that Kangashvili was in fact a patriotic Georgian citizen and state security agent. What's more, he was part of U.S.-Georgian security cooperation and highly respected by the CIA. The furious former MP suggested Kangashvili was assassinated in part because he loyally served Tbilisi, which is the capital of Georgia, at a time when it was an effective U.S. colony under the puppet Saakashvili's rule. And here's this guy on the internet. He's a sort of a Georgian stooge for the West, or a liberal Western friendly dissident from Georgia. I want to talk about an overlooked but important Georgian dimension of the prisoner swap. Failure to include this dimension has created unfavorable optics in the context of Russia's efforts to take over Georgia, the Georgian people's resistance, as well as the U.S. Okay, in Georgia, the U.S. has attempted to have color revolutions and prop up, politicians who are basically backed, by a foreign power, by the U.S. And they have the legislature there in Georgia recently passed a Foreign Agent Registration Act, which the U.S. and Georgian people have tried to act as if this was some sort of totally unacceptable and tyrannical act. Of course, the U.S. has a Foreign Agent Registration Act and so on. So this is just basically the U.S. wanting to meddle in a strategically pivotal country in Eurasia in order to damage Russian security, as they have attempted with Ukraine, and they've been trying to do this in Georgia. And it seems that the balance of political forces in Georgia are not wanting Georgia to become the next Ukraine. Go figure. And so it's become a strange situation. There's basically as I recall, a president who's a U.S. puppet and a foreigner, basically, but then the rest of the majority of the elected legislature is against this, and it's a strange situation down there. I mean, it's kind of like probably has some elements in common with the French situation, where there's the election and the head of state, recent legislative elections and so on, and the head of state are opposed to each other, and it's creating dysfunction and chaos. Okay, so get back to this guy's tweets, because for some reason he decided to put these on the internet. He says that Kangashvili was a British citizen and security agent, not a Chechen jihadist. And he puts that in quotation marks. He successfully fought both Islamic fundamentalism and Russian networks in Georgia and was part of U.S.-Georgia security cooperation. Also highly respected by the CIA. He was assassinated in part because he loyally served U.S. ally Georgia, now a Russian satellite. This guy goes farther to say this. So in an official statement, German Federal Prosecutor's Office said that behind the order to assassinate him was his opposition to the Russian, I don't have the tweets after that, but probably Russian policies in South Ossetia or something like that. Okay, so getting back to what the Grayzone wrote here. This Chechen agent worked for multiple Western spying agencies, and this part is strange to me. A September 2019 Daily Beast report by neoconservative operative Michael Weiss provided details on Kangashvili's alliance with the CIA and his Chechen war history. Describing him as a battle-tested veteran of those conflicts, he reportedly commanded enormous respect from ethnic Chechens residing in Georgia's Pankisi Gorge. Kangashvili was also a close confidant of Aslan Mashadov, Chechnya's separatist president, killed in a March 2005 FSB raid. He also enjoyed an extremely warm relationship with Western spying agencies. According to Weiss, this is in the Daily Beast, and this guy's just a neocon, so for some reason he feels that this is useful for propaganda purposes or whatever to put this out there, so consider that. According to Weiss, American counterterrorism officials not only found Kangashvili's intelligence credible and useful, but recruited new Chechen agents based on his assessments. These assets were subsequently sent abroad by the CIA. Simultaneously, he informed on members of his native community in Georgia. Oblique reference is also made to his 6-year stint as the valued asset of a European security service, and how his residence in Berlin was located right across the street from the headquarters of the BND, Germany's foreign intelligence agency. So this is a neocon person talking about someone who is a neocon agent and someone who was a Western asset in the Chechen War. It would be difficult to try to figure out what Michael Weiss thinks we should believe about what this guy was doing or what he was a part of. I mean, when you say battle-tested veteran, what battles are you talking about? And the clear implication, even of this, if you're talking about this person as a jihadi commander, I mean, he's in battle, but, you know, this is a strange thing to be writing about. I think it's an attempt to somehow portray some of these characters as people who are as a Georgian patriot or something to that effect, maybe, and then Russia just kills him, and so you want to have some way to demonize Russia and talk about, you know, how evil Vladimir Putin is and the Russian government, and so you need to somehow come up with some story about this guy that makes it not clear what he really was, which was a jihadi, but you need to have some biographical elements in there, maybe, and so you end up giving away more than you should, or maybe you're not expecting additional details like this to emerge. You're expecting this to sort of be the end of the story, but because of the prisoner exchange and so on, more is coming out here. I don't really know, but it is remarkable that you can basically assemble these things just from looking at publicly available sources and see pretty clearly, like, wow, this neocon agent is this neocon writer, operative, Michael Weiss, is here basically putting out disinformation about a McJihad operative whose actions were in furtherance of a neocon foreign policy, this project for a new American century and dominance over, the encirclement of Russia and manipulation of these jihadi networks to provide a pretext for Western imperialism and excuses, to put military bases and all, lily pad military bases in all these places. That's what was going on at this time. They wanted to put bases in like Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan. They would have liked to have put bases in Georgia. Of course, this is what the Ukraine thing is all about. They'd like to be able to put missiles in Ukraine that would just be minutes away from Moscow. I mean, this has been the U.S. grand strategy in the 21st century. It's quite brazen. So that fellow, Kangashvili, there's more in the article, so I recommend people check it out over at the Grayzone. And I'll try to get Kit Clarenberg to come on here. Maybe him and Alex Rubinstein would be up for coming on at some point together or separately. I don't know which. But this article also gets into the connections between the Chechen jihad operations and those that were going on in Bosnia. So it's a good article, and hats off to Kit Clarenberg for writing this. Do check it out. Another Grayzone article that I missed until it hadn't been out that long, a couple of weeks, but I missed it until recently, is about the assassination of the Haitian head of state. And the title here is Accused Financier of Moise. I should probably know how to pronounce that, but I don't. Moy's assassination, apparently advised by U.S. intelligence, and it's by Brian Sadie, who I'm not familiar with, but it's good that he wrote this article. So I'll read a bit from it and try to summarize it. Two plotters of the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moise were exposed as DEA informants. Another was unmasked as an FBI informant. Now newly released court documents provide the most startling evidence yet linking the conspirators with the U.S. government. And they get into more details. A South Florida businessman accused of funding the plot to assassinate former Haitian president Jovenel Moise. I don't know if that's going to end up being French or Spanish pronunciation. Probably French, I'm guessing, but I can't even touch that one. Received legal advice endorsing a mission to capture the head of state from a confidential informant of a U.S. intelligence agency, court documents unveiled in July 2024 allege. According to the accused's legal team, the discovery received from the government redacts the U.S. intelligence agency with which the informant is affiliated, but it is clear that he is a confidential informant for a U.S. intelligence agency. The businessman in question, Walter Vientimilla, and his company, Worldwide Capital Lending Group, which sounds like a good CIA front, potentially, stand accused of providing a $175,000 line of credit to Florida defense contractor CTU Security, LLC, which reportedly carried out the assassination. It's nice that they set up a LLC, and they're out in Florida, so maybe they have some of those old Cuban expats that the CIA used to use and that the mafia used to use, although I repeat myself, I guess. So maybe it's their kids or grandkids, who knows. On July 1st, Vientimilla's attorneys filed a pretrial motion to depose the alleged intelligence informant, JC, who's described as an Ecuadorian lawyer living in Bolivia. Vientimilla's defense argues that testimony from JC would support their contention that several investigative and administrative agencies of the United States government were aware of the actions and intentions of his alleged co-conspirators in Haiti and supported those actions. Yeah. Vientimilla's co-defendants also joined in that motion to depose JC in Bolivia. Several of them, including Arcangel Pretel Ortiz and Antonio Intriago, were accused by the Bolivian government of plotting an aborted coup attempt in October 2020 against President Luis Arce. German Alejandro Rivera Garcia, a retired Colombian army officer who helped lead the kill team in Haiti, was also present in Bolivia with this group. He was extradited to the U.S., pled guilty, and received a life sentence in late 2023. So, of course, as with old times, you use these guys in all these places that you want to intervene in a gangsterly fashion in the Western Hemisphere. So, like back when they wanted the Chilean military intelligence, or intelligence unit, DINA, to carry out a lot of the CIA's dirty work, they rolled up a lot of Cuban expats and even American kind of underworld operators like Michael Townley, right, whose namesake appears in Grand Theft Auto 5, to carry these things out. You have a kind of anti-communist international or a para-fascist sort of outfits that go around and do the dirty work that the intelligence agencies want to farm out to them to make it supposedly plausibly deniable. But of course, plausible for who is the question that we have to ask more and more as the U.S. becomes more brazen and desperate with all of its, violence escalating more and more in broad daylight and not really deniable, plausibly or otherwise anymore. Here's a picture of his co-conspirators that they put in the article. So I don't need to try to name all these guys, but this is a whole crew. So it's not just, of course, one guy, lone nut or lone contract killer. It wasn't like that. It's an organized operation here. Now, if you look at the history of Haiti, this is another sad chapter and a continuation of things that have long gone on in Haiti. I heard the sociologist William I. Robinson say that the Haitians were the first people to have a successful slave revolution and overthrow Western colonialism that way. And for that, the West has never forgiven them, has been punishing them ever since, 200 years and counting. I think that that's a reasonable thing to say. The debts, the unpayable and odious debts that are heaped on Haiti decade after decade are really unforgivable. It's created such crushing poverty and disparity of wealth and living standards there. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's really horrific. And in the U.S., in the post after the Cold War ended, very shortly after the Cold War ended, you had a coup that deposed Aristide, who was part of a populist party that was influenced by liberation theology, a sort of popular leftist popular party that sought to improve life for Haiti and to make it less of an imperial, an object of imperial domination and exploitation. And so he was overthrown via a coup that involved assets from the SIN, which was the intelligence agency of Haiti, which was very much corrupted by drug traffic and was, pretty much a proxy of the CIA. And so there was this, drug and CIA and narcotics, narco parastate enabled coup that deposed Aristide in late-ish in George H.W. Bush's administration, and it was a political issue during the campaign. And Bill Clinton kind of moved to, I guess I'd say he was to the left of H.W. Bush on this, and he essentially agreed to restore Aristide to power, and that's what he did. So he does that, but Aristide's very limited in what he can do because of IMF conditionalities and other structural constraints that basically handcuff leaders in the global South by design. And so he tried to compromise and accommodate all these people. Eventually, he is during his. I can't remember if there was if it was an uninterrupted tenure after he was reinstalled. But at any rate, he's back in power in the 2000s, and I believe it's in 2004. There's another coup, and this time it's somebody from the It's a guy who is perhaps a Haitian, but he's in Dominican Republic, and then he comes over with this army. But it's basically like he's a drug trafficker, and it's another drug trafficking kind of operation where this drug trafficker is able to put together enough people and come across the border, and then the U.S. military essentially tells Aristide that you're in danger. You have to leave. This is a crisis in your country, and these rebels are coming. You need to get on this plane now. And at gunpoint, they force him to go. It doesn't seem that the forces really would have had the ability to take power. It's not as if that guy, this drug dealer that launched the invasion, took power after that. It was basically just a ruse to get rid of Aristide. Jeffrey Sachs talks about this because Aristide himself told me that Washington was trying to get him. And Jeffrey Sachs at that point was a bit more naive, as I recall, the way he tells the story. And he says, no, we're not going to do that. Don't be silly. And then the U.S. does. And so this was part of his education, which has been pretty expansive, I guess, because he's become much more aware of standard U.S. imperial practices. And so Haiti, I'm not even going to try to summarize what happens after that. There's the hurricane and Clinton's actions in Haiti, both during his presidency, which basically destroyed Haitian agriculture on purpose with IMF conditionalities and restructuring packages and so on. And then later, the Clinton Foundation is active there and has exploited Haiti in a number of ways, as I understand it. So, and then they refuse to the U.S. has refused to allow Aristide's party, which is like Hanmi Favalis, if I remember correctly, to run in these elections, even though they're the most popular party. So it's, again, the U.S. Talking about democracy or itself as a defender of the free world is just completely absurd. And it's nowhere is it more absurd than in Haiti. And so for the people in Haiti, whenever they hear any U.S. talk of democracy and rules-based international order, they probably must laugh or cry, one of the two. I'd like to thank Data Chavarria for producing this episode, and thanks to you for tuning in. Thanks also to Mock Orange for providing the music, and Casey Moore and Michelle Boley for the intro and the graphics, including this one that I recycled from American Exception, the American Exception podcast. Thanks out there to the viewers and the supporters here and the extended American Exception family for making all this happen. Till next time.